So the goals here are to define periodization and workloads. And then we'll get into routines and times of year. Eventually, we'll get into the specifics of your day to day grind. What does it look like specifically as a pitcher, but it will also apply to hitters. I can't emphasize outside of sleep how important workloads are to an athlete. So many times we talk about overuse, quote unquote overuse, but we don't talk about the solution to it or how to prevent having an overuse injury. It's such a common phrase, but what does that really mean? But first, let's start with a couple stories. This is Gavin. Gavin is a guy that came to us over a year at this point. He's still working with us today. He's a pitcher, came to us with shoulder tightness that hadn't gone away. He'd already seen one physical therapist and he was trying to prep for his season. Gavin was feeling fatigued all the time. His velo was dropping. We looked at his shoulder strength, his shoulder range of motion, his grip strength, his mobility. So we talked to his pitching coach, and there were some things that we adjusted. But once we got to talking to Gavin more, it became extremely apparent. Gavin's issue was he was lifting heavy 4 times a week, throwing heavy 3 to 4 times a week, and wasn't getting any recovery in whatsoever. And the last time he'd taken more than a week or 2 weeks off from throwing, he couldn't even remember. So the solution for Gavin was, let's spread your workloads out. You don't necessarily have to stop lifting 4 times a week, but we should make this more efficient. And the reason for that is workloads and periodization. We recommended he take 3 to 4 weeks off from throwing because he hadn't done that in a while. And then we said, you're going to have a high intensity day, a medium intensity day, and a low intensity day. And there's going to be days where you don't lift or throw a baseball at all. Lo and behold, a year later, he continues to talk about how that changed his career path. He was just continuously bashing his head against the wall, and he would have continued to have shoulder tightness, and who knows what that would have ended up in. He was big enough, he was strong enough, but he just didn't have the understanding of how to manage his workloads, which is super common. Another story, this guy, Mr. Leif Palmer, he's a Golden High School graduate. He was at Oregon State for a couple of years, and he recently transferred to Cal Poly. He was having consistent forearm tightness, consistent low back issues. His hips were super tight. We looked at his physical limitations, but he would have continued to bash his head against the wall. When we presented the same concept to him of high, medium, low, and understanding what to do for arm care on the back end after he's done throwing and on the front end before he was throwing, it was a huge factor in his performance. If you go to a traditional physical therapist, they're just going to continuously stretch you out, give you exercises, work on the physical things, which they should be doing, but there should also be a conversation about workloads. So that's why this stuff is important. But how do you define workloads? Workload is just the total amount of stress that you put your body under. It's in sports, it's in life. You only have one workload bucket, which we'll get into. Everything that you do in your everyday life as an athlete, as a human, goes into your workload bucket. Walking to class, going to school, going to work, doing your homework, the weight room sessions, practice, your daily step count, everything counts as a drop. If you fill your workload bucket too high for too long, too often, that's eventually going to spill over. It's going to result in fatigue and tightness in this overuse injury scenario. Overuse happens when you don't understand how to manage these workloads. So you have to be able to empty this bucket out at the end of every day, at the end of every week. And that's the concept that we want to talk about. Periodization. Everybody knows intuitively now, but in the 50s and 60s, this guy named Seeley found out, well, if you work and you stress the body in a certain way, the body adapts, and then you recover, and then you continue to do it over and over and over again. And that's when weightlifters and track and field athletes discovered this idea of this overload principle, and it became popularized. And I'm bringing that up because we still use this today. This is how the body functions and operates at the highest levels. Now, the fourth step is the one that we want to avoid, because Seeley also discovered that you can do too much. And that's what overtraining is. That's when we run into these, again, quote unquote, overuse injuries. Periodization. You have an off season, you have a preseason, you have an in season, and then you have a transition phase. If you think of 4 different blocks, then there has to be a time and place for recovery and rest. If you're listening on the podcast, we have this periodization that goes with straight line to the right, and it's separated into 4 sections: off season, preseason, in season, and transition. That's all periodization means. So going back to Gavin and Leif, those are the missing pieces in their stories that they didn't know how to fix. And that's what we help them fix. So periodization, simply put, is just planning and organizing training into different phases like building blocks. So athletes can get stronger, they stay healthy, and peak at the right time. With periodization, with workloads, you have to watch out for overtraining. Overtraining is when all of this is out of balance. You don't have a real plan, you don't have any real structure, and your body breaks down from not enough recovery. I can't emphasize that enough. Athletes think that taking a day off is weak or they're not improving. That's not the case. Without sleep, without recovery, you're not going to be able to harvest the fruits of your labor. And if you're overtraining, you can do that from over competing, so too many games, but you can also do that from just training too much or a combination of the two. So overtraining can come in a lot of different ways. It can sneak up on you. We want to be able to work harder and work smarter. So let me give you some examples. Periodization is like cooking a meal. So you have your prep, cooking, plating, and then cleaning up the kitchen. Your prep is chopping, seasoning. You can think about lifting heavy, your power work, mechanical work, stuff like that. Then you get into the second phase, which is your cooking phase, or in your case, you get a brief deload in, you continue lifting, but you start to build up for the season. Then you get to the season. That's when you plate it, serve it, and eat it. You perform, you lift heavy 2 times a week, but you're really just enjoying the work you already put in because you're striking fools out, you're hitting bombs, you're doing whatever it is as an athlete that you're good at. This is the fourth phase. This is cleaning up the kitchen. If you're married like I am, you know you got to clean up the kitchen. You can't just leave a big mess after you make a meal. Otherwise, you're going to regret it. So this is your transition or your recovery phase. You have to take those recovery sessions. Think about it like video games. Video games are a good example of continuously leveling up. So the first person game, the player that you start the game with isn't equipped with the tools, skills, or the resources that you need to beat the final boss. You slowly throughout the game improve your player's skills. No chance that you'd be able to beat the final boss with that player that you started the game with. But by the time you get to the end of the game, you've gathered enough skills to be able to beat the final boss. Again, I'm not a big gamer. All right. So overtraining and overworking and overuse injuries really happens when you skip that last recovery phase, when you don't clean up the kitchen after the meal. If you're listening on the podcast, it's the same graphic of periodization, but I X'd out the transition phase and there's an arrow that goes straight from in season to off season. So without that phase, that's when you run into overtraining. And to a certain degree, most athletes have overtrained. You know what it looks like. You're fatigued. You start to play worse. Sometimes guys will tell me, I don't really know why my velo's dipping. I feel fine. I feel okay. Most of the time, if you take some numbers and you look at some of their data, you see that they're fatigued. Their grip strength goes down. Their shoulder strength goes down. They're a little tighter than usual. You have nagging soreness or injuries and stuff like that that just won't go away. You even have trouble focusing in school or outside of sports in general. And then the big one is mood swings. You feel like you've got no motivation. You're just not fun to be around. Generally speaking, these are signs of overtraining. And if you're experiencing all of these, it doesn't mean that you're overtraining necessarily. But if you haven't taken a break or you're not structuring your training in a way that keeps you healthy, and this is consistently you, then there might be something there for you from a training perspective that we need to adjust. So periodization matters because it prevents overtraining. It helps you become a better athlete, you become a better baseball player, and it helps you peak at the right times. A lot of the times we view these things as one injury and that's it. But that's not necessarily the case. If your workloads are up and down and you don't have a good training structure, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have an injury right off the bat. Your performance slowly can go down as the season goes on. Everybody in here has had the experience where you have one good year, one good season, and then the next season, it seems like everybody caught up to you. Oftentimes what we see with our athletes in practice, it's because their workloads are just, their workloads need adjusting. And this stuff's super important because it's at the root and the foundation of staying healthy. Here's specifically for baseball players, my recommendation when it comes to structuring training from a calendar year perspective. From March to July, just play games, maintain, get on your arm care program, stay healthy, do what you need to. August to September, this is when you recover. We can reverse some of the effects of the season, improve your mobility, improve your strength. You start your strength and conditioning program. And then October to February is when you train and ramp yourself up for the season. If you take March to July to perform, August to September to recover, October to February to optimize, I promise you're going to feel a lot better than if you just go all year long. Or the flip side, where you just go constantly and then you stop. Then you try to ramp back up and it just doesn't work. There's this podcast interview I did. His name's Dr. Tim Gabbett. I'm going to link this in the supplemental resources. And I got to ask him all these questions about what workloads are, how to manage your workloads, how to structure your trainings. And it was really fascinating to hear him talk about that stuff. But I can't stress and emphasize enough when we're talking about workloads and overuse injuries, and we talk about the bases loaded injury model, not having these workloads dialed in definitely puts a runner on base, if not several runners on base. And we don't want that to happen because that is how injuries start to pile up. Hey, everybody. I hope you're really enjoying this training so far. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of workloads and overuse injuries. You're going to move on to part 2 of overuse injuries. And that part's really going to discuss how do you structure your training as an athlete This is probably one of the most important trainings in this series. So really pay attention to how we structure our training. Pay attention to what it looks like on a practical level. These are methods that we use, techniques that we use every single day with all of our athletes, to be honest. And if you have any questions, make sure you reach out and ask.